join us. So welcome to another spring quarterly update. These sessions, for anyone who hasn't been before, are really framed as news from us about what's happened over the previous quarter, and then we pick a specific topic for us to go into more detail on and have a panel session about. So what that looks like for us today is that I will introduce you to the agenda, the panel, and then I'll get into the spring update. So I'll spend about 15 minutes in the spring update. And then I will hand over to Jimmy Cockerton from Impact X, who will give us an overview of the Microsoft Venture Studio that Spring has been partnering with, and we'll give you much more information about that. And then we're going to open up to a panel session. So very happy to say that we have some new faces in the sector today. We do tend to, as a sector, roll the same people out over and over again. So it's really happy place for us to have these new people joining us for the conversation today. So we've got Eric Collins, who is CEO of Impact X. We've got Jimmy Cockerton, who is the Venture Studio Director at Impact X. And we've got Sahel Zulfikar, who is the CEO from Data Technics. So I will introduce this panel again later in the session, but for now what I wanted to do was start by giving you a bit of an update about where we are with Spring. So for anybody who is new to the conversation, we are the Innovation Centre of Excellence for the UK and Ireland water sector. What that means is we're here to accelerate innovation and enable collaboration within the sector. The concept started back in 2020 when there was a discussion around needing more of a centralised facilitation of innovation in the sector. And back then, a design was created, a high-level design was created for a Centre of Excellence. And in December of 21, we then did a bit more detailed design, listened to what the sector needed, and launched the Centre of Excellence and rebranded as Spring. 2022 was a bit of a roller coaster year for anybody who has set up a new business. The funding roller coaster was a bumpy one for us. We lost a funding bid, and then we actually gained investment from water companies. So it was a year of really finding our feet financially, but I'm really happy to say that we now have more stability when it comes to investment into Spring. That does mean that we were slowed down in our ambitions last year and we didn't achieve as much as we wanted to, but really happy that we're now in a place where we can present a great team to you, a committed service offering, and now we can start accelerating the value that we're delivering for water companies, suppliers, and the sector as a whole. Interestingly, though, since we launched, it's fair to say, I would say, the innovation ecosystem has matured and evolved, and so the need for Spring has matured and evolved over those few years as well. So when we launched, there weren't that many innovation challenges happening in the sector, whereas now we have a lot of innovation challenges happening across the sector. I would also say innovation is no longer something that's given lip service. It is truly starting to be embedded into cultures and organisations. And that means a lot more opportunity for us, Spring, to bring efficiencies to that, and for any innovators on the call to truly help solve the problems in the sector as well. So what I'm going to do is just start, as always, by giving the Water Innovation Strategy a plug. So for anybody who doesn't know, this document was created back in 2020 as well. We hear a lot from innovators in the sector that they don't know what the priorities are that the sector has. This document is designed to exactly tell you what the priority ambitions are. So what it has is 7 themes. So these themes are common across the entire UK and Ireland water sector and have been designed and agreed and committed to by the entire sector. So you have everything from providing the services society needs and expects, all the way through to enabling diverse, future-ready people and partnership working. There are high-level ambitions that we want to meet by 2050. And then underneath this, there are hundreds of short, medium, long-term ambitions that we want innovators to help solve. So my one recommendation is always, if there's one thing you take away from what we say today, if you're an innovator and you're looking to make sure you're solving a priority problem that the sector has, please go and look at this document. Now, hopefully, Chloe Tooth, who is our comms exec, is on the call, but having a few technical issues, but she's hopefully going to drop some links in the chat for us so that you can then connect to the things that I'm saying. But if not, this document lives on the Spring website and you can go and download it and get fully immersed in it. One of the service offerings we have is Spring Accelerators, and that's an end-to-end process where we will put a call for innovation out and then mobilize that into a collaborative trial with water companies. What we're trying to achieve is removing duplication of innovation efforts. So a conservative effort is that an innovation project is duplicated 4 times in the sector. So we want to remove that duplication. So last year we ran 2 accelerators. Spring Accelerator 1 was focusing on achieving net zero carbon. And Spring Accelerator 2 was focusing on delivering resilient infrastructure systems. So we have 10 innovations in our portfolio at the moment where we're mobilizing trials. We're learning a lot of lessons from that process, and I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail soon. But given the topic we're talking about today, I did just want to call out one particular piece of information on this slide, and that is in enabling diverse future-ready people and partnership working. The sector has committed to, by 2050, that the whole sector's workforce has the skills and diversity of thought to take an active approach to prepare for and address emerging challenges. And I think that's going to be really critical as we move into the Venture Studio piece that we're going to be talking about shortly. So that's the water innovation strategy. So where we're at with our actual offerings, one of our biggest opportunities and biggest challenges is that we are here for the whole sector. So what that means for us is there are lots of problems for us to solve, but what it also means for us is there are lots of expectations to be met. And so what we're trying to do now is move into a period of stability so that we can actually put forethought into our planning, into our resources, and deliver things with quality. Whilst you always want to be dynamic in an innovative situation, you want to be iterative, there is a point where that tips over into too much iteration, too much dynamic working. So we really want to commit to this to stabilize our delivery. So this is what you can expect from us over the next year. Our vision hasn't changed. Forgive me, sorry, my screen has just had a blip, so I'm going to have to come back in. Andrea Geisen, I've just come back and seen your face on the screen. Lovely to see you. Okay, wonderful. So we should be back. So the vision hasn't changed to be global leaders in open innovation. To achieve that, we want to attract, connect and support innovators across the industry to accelerate transformation. The 7 strategic themes that I've just showed you in the water innovation strategy, they are the core foundation of everything that we want to do, and we want to enable innovations to solve those problems. In terms of our service offerings, this is where some subtle changes have been made. So we've listened to where the sector is at and what they need, and actually we've added in a new step called an ambition surgery that will be a detailed deep dive that brings ops teams, innovators, other relevant stakeholders into a session to really get under the skin of what one of those ambitions means from the water innovation strategy. At the end of that session, we will all be very clear on what the problem is, but also importantly, what already exists in that area so that we're removing duplication of efforts. We will then ask people to submit their ideas into an innovation marketplace, which will be a list of solutions that we host that water companies can search for innovations that are going to help them to solve their problems. Importantly, then they can prioritise what we want to take through into an innovation exchange. Those innovation exchanges are much more than a pitch. It's a two-way conversation between subject matter experts and innovators to really almost start scoping what that innovation should be. And at the end of those sessions, we will have commitment to either move into a collaborative project or not from water companies. We'll then move into the mobilisation phase. Now, I mentioned we've learned a lot from Spring Accelerator 1 and 2. We have learned there are still quite a few barriers that we are trying to break down in terms of mobilising work at speed. We're actually going to be running a sprint at the Northumbrian Innovation Festival to help start breaking down some of these barriers and actually design more detail behind this service offering. So again, if Chloe is dropping links in the chat, then she will drop a link in there, and we would love to invite any of you to come and join that sprint if you are thinking of going up there. If you've never been before, it is a fantastic event that's really creative, really innovative, and a really great way of solving big problems together. It's a lot of fun, so please have a look at the link. It does say invite only, but consider this your invite to come and join us there. Knowledge transfer is the other service offering that we've got, and knowledge transfer is an absolute key part of accelerating innovation in the sector. So our goal is to accelerate learning through building a knowledge library and a programme of showcases that do deep dive sessions into particular innovation insights. So for example, this week we had Welsh Water and Cardiff University doing a deep dive into an eDNA odour monitoring tool and piece of work that was funded from one of the Ofwat Innovation Fund projects. It was a great session, received really well, really great feedback from people saying that they want to take those lessons and embed them into their own business. We've had over 1,000 people register for those showcases now. And now from this point onwards, we're looking to be a bit more strategic. It's been quite reactionary in terms of people approaching us saying they want to share lessons. But we do, from the next few months onwards, want to start looking at where are the gaps in knowledge and how can we go find the knowledge to then share with the sector. So that will be happening from September onwards. We also will be introducing more supplier-led showcases going forwards as well. So if you want to get involved in that, then please drop us a note at our admin@Spring Innovation email address. More information about that is on our website as well. We also have some brokerage tools that we're using. So the testbed register that we migrated from UK Water Partnerships is on our website. We're now also hosting the Ofwat bid declaration sheet. So what that is a sheet between all of the water companies declaring what bids they're going to put in and opening up for collaboration. So we can then use that to broker between water companies. We also have the Innovation Snapshot, which is a list of existing innovation projects in the sector. Again, we can use that as a brokerage tool, removing duplication of efforts and making sure that water companies know what each other is working on. Importantly, what we'll be able to do is we're moving towards a future trial. So if a water company wants to create a new trial, we can then go and broker which other companies want to be involved in that trial with them. A great example of that is Welsh Water reached out and said they were going to be doing a trial around mycelium in the next AMP, and they wanted to know who else wanted to be involved. From the brokerage we've done, there are now 6 other water companies involved in that trial. So a lot of duplication has been removed in that process. In terms of the team, I'll go into a little bit more detail about the team shortly, but one thing I did just want to mention is that we do have a vacancy for an innovation delivery manager, and given every opportunity to promote this. So again, if Chloe is able to drop links into the chat, there'll be a link to that coming into the chat if anybody did want to talk to us about that. From a funding perspective, we this year are operating with an investment of 750k from water companies, and we are looking to match that with an additional 250k from suppliers. So we will be starting to introduce paid for services in the future to help us bring in revenue from both suppliers and water companies, because we are here for the benefit of both. So moving through into team, just to give it a little bit more information about team. So very happy to say that I now have a fabulous team growing around me. We've got Imelda Fosu, who is Comms and Engagement Manager. She started with us last October, brings a lot of startup world experience into the business. Ben Hatfield-Wright is our Programme Manager. He comes from Anglian Water, 18 years of programme management experience there. Chloe Tooth, comms exec, who comes from a supplier working in the water sector, so understands a lot of that side of the sector. And Thomas Walker, who is our senior innovation manager, comes from the Royal National Institute of Blind and the innovation team there, and brings a huge amount of experience of innovation accelerators. Again, the one position we're filling at the moment, Innovation Delivery Manager. So we'll be hoping to have another new face in the team within the coming months. One other thing that I wanted to introduce you on, which is new since the last time we did one of these sessions, is we have done a bit of a reframe and added some new faces to the Spring board. What we wanted to do is make sure that this board reflects the diversity of the community that we are here to serve. And what I mean by that is we want the right balance of water companies and non-water company representatives, so suppliers and others in the sector. So what that looks like now is Steve Kay, from the CEO from Uckware, is still our chair. We have 3 water company representatives: Nigel Watson from Northumbrian Water, Tony Harrington from Welsh Water, and Jason Tucker from Anglian Water. We are going to be rotating those water company seats to get other water company representation into the board as well. We also have Lilla Thompson, CEO from British Water, who is a fantastic conduit into the supply chain for us. Also very happy to say a new face that's come in, Christian Inglis, who is the head of urban systems in Innovate UK. Very happy to have Christian involved. He's come in as a bit of a fundraising role to help us with looking for external funding and ways that we can better connect into Innovate UK and other systems that are out there as well. Another new face, Anthony David King, who is a fabulous founder and investor in the sector. We've been working with Anthony for some time to give us advice on how to engage with startups, and we've been very impressed with his experience. So he is bringing startup and entrepreneur knowledge into the board. Graham Wright, who is from Fujitsu, sits on Spring's Strategic Advisory Panel, and that's a group of people that were set up from the supply chain to advise us on the direction we're going in. What we've started to do is rotate one of those seats into the board on an annual basis. So Graham will be sitting on the board for this year, and then we will rotate another person from that panel in. Denise Massey stays with us. So Denise heads up the Energy Innovation Centre, who are about 10 years ahead of us in this journey and a huge amount of experience to share with us and help steer us on the way. So very happy to say that this new board is just over 50% non-water company representation. Obviously, our core stakeholder is water companies, but it's also suppliers, and we want to make sure that we're getting that diversity of thought coming into this conversation. We had our first meeting together a month ago. The energy was high, lots of ideas and thoughts being bounced around. So really excited to see where this goes over the next few years. One last thing from me, I just wanted to flash up that we are now starting to measure our value in KPIs. Now, the numbers on here are not exact numbers. This is a draft illustration just to show you the direction we're going in. But as many of you know on the call, we need to be able to measure our value to know whether we are achieving what we want to achieve. So we are going to start measuring the duplication that we've removed, either in numbers of trials or a financial value. Also the learning accelerated, so how many showcases we've done, but importantly where that learning goes and who's actually embedded it. From the autumn, we will be introducing an NPS score. We obviously need to track revenue and investment in, and we also want to track comms and outreach as well. So that, as I say, it's just a very quick flash up of we will be being open, transparent about our KPIs and the value that we're delivering. We are going to start reporting against this going forward. So really just to say, watch this space for more information on KPIs. So that is everything from me. What I'm going to do is hand over to Jimmy Cockerton from Impact X. Just before I do, I just wanted to say, Spring's role in this partnership is something that I'm particularly proud of for many reasons. Innovation is obviously a huge value for me personally and for the business, but as is representation and diversity and inclusion is something that I'm personally hugely passionate about. And also, as I mentioned in the Water Innovation Strategy, we have that entire theme about enabling future diverse ready people. So I think this studio is a wonderful thing for us, Spring, to be involved with, to not only accelerate innovation, but also tackle that challenge of underrepresentation in the sector as well. So with that in mind, Jimmy, I'll hand over to you and then you can walk us through an overview of the studio.
Lovely. Thank you, Carly. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. So I am the director of the ImpactX Venture Studio, which is a partnership between Microsoft ImpactX and Spring Innovation. And this kind of came from me asking myself a bunch of questions from my previous work. So previously I was in Microsoft. We lost the slides there, Carly.
Sorry, yeah, I keep having technical difficulties whenever I click on anything.
I'll share them from mine if you like.
That might be easier for you, just so whatever's going on at my end doesn't disrupt you.
There we go.
Fabulous, we can see those.
Brilliant. Okay. So yeah, so previously to joining ImpactX, I was in Microsoft and I led on strategic growth and ran a lot of work around innovation and startups. And there were a few things that I learned from running accelerators and working with innovators, both in the corporate side and in the startup world as well. And some of those things were, one was I started to notice after running accelerators that one of the most valuable things, and this probably won't be a surprise saying it out loud, one of the most valuable things that Microsoft brought to the startups that we worked with was access to industry knowledge, domain knowledge, and access to customers, to talk to customers that they just wouldn't get access to otherwise. That was one of the things I learned. The second thing that I started to notice was that most early stage businesses didn't have a great focus on sales. Lots of them would be busy building the tech. Most of them wouldn't have a sales structure or sales people within them. And that's pretty common of early stage businesses while they're building out. But they're kind of, a lot of them had got to this stage where they thought the only way of them getting cash in the door was through raising capital. And there seemed to be this lost art of, cash flow is king, of understanding that they needed to drive sustainable revenues within their business. So that was the other part. And then the third thing I started to notice was that there was a study we did that showed us that 75% of internal innovations in big corporates tended to fail. They would start and they would get somewhere with ideas, but most of those ideas would never get to production. They'd never see the true light of day and see the value that they were supposed to deliver. And so I started to think about how do we do things a little bit differently and how do we start to tackle some of those areas. And I was then introduced to Eric and the team at ImpactX. And over some lovely scrambled eggs in a cafe in London one day, we started to ask ourselves a few questions. We started to think, is there a way that we can reduce the cost and risk of innovation to corporates? How do we push that into the private investment world, the VC world, where people are used to putting their money into potentially risky ventures for bigger rewards? And then if we do that, how can we then start to build these startups by validating the commercial opportunity as early as possible? So it's what's known as product market fit. So how do we know that the market wants what these people are bringing? How do we shorten that and de-risk it and bring that process really, really early rather than lots of build and expense and then see if we've got the right thing further down the line? And if we can do that, if we can get product market fit early, is there a way we can then rapidly accelerate the pipeline and the sales generation within these organizations? Can we, within 12 months, get them significantly revenue generating? And doing all of that, just to put the cherry on the cake, how do we do that with working with underrepresented founders as well, tip the equity scales? And the stats are pretty terrible around this stuff in that 0.24% of capital goes to Black founders, less than 3% goes to female founders. And the accelerators that I used to run, we would give ourselves a little bit of a pat on the back when we'd hit 40% of underrepresented representation on our accelerators. And so the question was, well, actually, if we really want to tip the scales on this, why don't we be more deliberate about it? Why don't we be more exclusive with the way we're recruiting and working with these underrepresented communities to give them the opportunity? And coming out of that was the Impact Innovation Framework. So this is where we wanted to collide a number of worlds together, which has resulted in the partnership that you see today. So firstly, we wanted to bring together an entire industry. We wanted to bring them all together, have those views across an industry, and an industry ideally that already works together reasonably well. And hence the water company were a great fit for that. And then what we want to do is bring together the innovators, the people with the ideas, the people that think differently, that will think about solving the problems and the needs the industry has in a way that we just don't. And then bringing in that third part, which is that private investment piece. And the organization, the VC areas where they know how to rapidly grow, they know how to rapidly innovate and move through the growth stages really, really quickly. And doing all of that, we want it to be impactful as well. And all of these things are underpinned by digital and data, hence the Microsoft angle to all of this too. But it wasn't just about growth and commercial growth. A lot of this came from impact. And this is what Microsoft's about, it's what Spring's about, and it's what Impact X is about. So what we wanted to do was, when we went through this process, we wanted to make sure that we were measuring what we did, very much like Carly's shown you the KPIs there, but how do we know that we're moving the dial on the things that we want to change and the impact we want to have for people and planet? And this had to come for us when we were looking at where we wanted to build the Venture Studio. For us, it had to come from a sustainability place. This was one of Microsoft's core requirements as well. We wanted to do something for the planet, and water was selected because I think water isn't viewed as critically as it should be. I think it often gets overshadowed by the conversations around carbon when we think of sustainability, but it's equally important and intrinsically linked. And we need to start thinking about water and water scarcity and water quality much more seriously than it's at the forefront of people's minds today. But as I said earlier, we wanted to be absolutely exclusive and driving opportunity into those underrepresented founders. So the impact for us was really, really important. So why did we do a venture studio? Well, the traditional method for building startups is that some very smart people get together, or an individual has a fantastic idea. And I have a lot of admiration for founders. I think they're brave, crazy, and bold, all in equal measure. And what they'll then do is they'll start to build a company up. And if you think about those of us that have worked in large organizations, just the number of different roles in that organization, and a founder wears all those hats. They are the HR officer, they're the CFO, they're the COO, they're the CEO, they're the sales, they're the marketing, they do everything. They wear 20, 30 hats every single day interchangeably. Where the idea behind a venture studio is that you wrap those resources around those companies as well. So you become part of the founding team with them. The idea being that you're growing hand in hand and you're bringing in that expert experience that you don't need every day, but when you need it, it's vitally important and you need that experience to be of high quality. So the venture studio is the model that we picked. And there's been a number of studies recently on the results of venture studios compared to just traditional investment routes and growth for organizations. And that data is showing that organizations that go through a venture studio, on average, are accelerating about 3 years quicker than other organizations, which is quite a phenomenal pace. So the main metric they're using is kind of different funding points and exits, but for most companies that exit between the 7 to 10 years, if you're shaving 3 years off of that's quite a chunk. The other thing it showed was that there was a 44% better success rate for organizations going through studios as well. And that's in terms of everything. That's in terms of those that succeed and don't fail. That's also in terms of those how big they grow as well. And another metric for showing the growth of these organizations and how many of them are successful, it's funding isn't everything, as I mentioned earlier, but you're 4.5 times more likely to achieve those initial early funding rounds if you've been through a studio, which is a sure sign to the market that you're investable and you're growing and you've got traction. So studios are starting to become a very, very efficient and effective way of building early stage companies. So once we'd got to this point, this led us, and we were introduced to Carly and Spring Innovation. And we were fascinated by Spring Innovation because I think it's amazing that the water industry has this organization that is dedicated to driving innovation. And I think that's amazing for 2 reasons. One is, I think that innovation is hard to do as a day job. So I think having somebody else that's focused on how that happens, and not just how the innovation happens, but how it actually gets put into practice and into operation as well, is really, really key. But secondly, that the industry has that much of a focus on innovation and value it that much that it needs an organization and supports an organization like this. So I think it's a brilliant thing. So we worked with Spring Innovation, and we pulled together a small core team with some representatives from United Utilities, Anglian Water and Northumbrian Water. And we spent 3 months or so looking at what are the opportunities from using the starting point of the water innovation strategy, but what are the 3 opportunities and corresponding problem statements that we want to ask the market to give us solutions to. And these are the 3 that you can see on the screen that we came up with. So one kind of drifted in and out of the conversation, but eventually was too big to ignore, but all about water quality and polluting discharges and from all different sources about how do we tackle that issue all up. The second one was then thinking about, it started from the insights that the industry needs. So the industry needs more insights to be able to become more effective, to do more interactions, be more proactive, be more efficient. To get those insights, it needs more data. That data tends to come from devices like smart meters and sensors. So how do we enable more of those kind of devices to get out there quicker? Because yes, over the next 10 years, we'll be able to get there. But if we wanted to deploy all the ones we want in the next year or so, that's a massive capital outlay. So is there a smarter way of us deploying financing and looking at how we get these devices out there? Or even are there more cost-effective ways of getting that data? And then the third is all around the demand. So this is always supposedly the low-hanging fruit in any sustainability initiative. How do we use less of something? Because then not much needs to change other than human behaviour, which is the other side of the coin, which says human behaviour is, of course, the hardest thing to change. So what we're looking at there is how do we change consumer and business behaviour to think about the water that they're using on a day-by-day basis, and really, how do we change people's mindsets? How do we flick that switch that makes people think about water as a finite resource? I mean, we've had the recent energy crisis, which has really sharpened people's minds to the costs of energy and the resources that go behind that. We kind of need that same switch to happen within water. So these are the 3 opportunities that we put out into the market to look for innovators and solutions to offer us solutions for. And what that's led to is our current recruit process, which has been going on for about 6 or 7 weeks now and closes next week. So on the 14th of June, we had a show and tell event. So we had experts from across the industry talking and doing a deep dive into each of those opportunities and problem statements you saw in the last slide. Which was a great event. We had 30 different innovators on there attending. The applications for the Venture Studio actually close tomorrow, end of day tomorrow. So if you do know anybody out there or anybody in this call is thinking of applying, you've still got time. It only takes about 10 minutes and we'd love to see your application. We then have next week, we have 2 pitching sessions. So we've got an online pitching session where we'll shortlist 10 organisations on the 28th. And they'll all get to pitch to us, and there'll be a bit of a Q&A and a scoring from that. From there, we're looking to take another 5 through to the final judging panel next Friday on the 30th of June, where we will then down select 3 successful organisations. Those 3 organisations we will then do some further due diligence with and some further work with over that next week. Before they then go and join you all and those that are going to the Northumbrian Water Innovation Festival, where they're going to join a number of sprints to really help them accelerate their thinking and what they're going to do next with their products and solutions. We'll then have a week's break, and then the studio really starts in anger, where we really start to accelerate them. So what do they get from joining the studio? Well, the key things that the innovators are going to receive is access to future customers and access to industry experts and mentors in a way that they just can't get anywhere else. But they're also going to access the studio resources that I talked about earlier. So if they need a CFO or a HR or a COO or a CTO, whatever they need, they'll be there to support them when they need them. There's also free working space in London and access to Microsoft technical resources, as well as up to 250k of seed investment and Microsoft credits and access to licenses and things like LinkedIn sales as well to really help them grow their revenues. So I'd imagine you're all now sat there thinking, Jimmy, this sounds awesome. How do I get involved? Well, good question. On the 28th and the 30th, we have the judging panels. We're still interested to hear from people that would like to support those judging panels. We have people at the moment representing from Microsoft Impact X and from the water industry, but we're definitely interested to hear from other people that perhaps sit in the supplier community or just have experience across the industry or really recognise some of those problem statements. So if you'd like to be part of our judging panel, then please do get in touch on the email address at the bottom of the slide. For any innovators, either on the call or that you happen to know, the closing date is tomorrow, end of day tomorrow. So please do push it to anybody, and I'll share the website for applying on the next slide. For any partners and suppliers in the water ecosystem as well, as we move past the recruitment stage and we start to look into what happens next, we're really interested to talk to other partners that might want to be part of working with some of these innovations that we bring up, because they won't work in isolation. They will have to be part of a larger ecosystem. So anybody that's interested in talking to us about how we partner with that, helping them grow and potentially becoming, I don't know, resellers or partners on delivery, we'd love to hear from you as well. And of course, it'd be remiss for me not to mention investors. Anybody that you know or anybody on the call that likes to invest in water innovation, in underrepresented founders, or simply just returns, then very interested to hear from those folks as well. So that's it for me. Hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview of the Venture Studio, why we're doing it, and why we think it's really going to help move the dial on innovation, not just for the startup world, but for corporates as well within the water industry and other partners. So it's the last day tomorrow for applications. The website's there if you want to know more, or feel free to email me. But thank you very much for your time, and back to you, Carly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jimmy. That was really helpful. And if I can invite all of our panel members to come and join us now, that would be wonderful. And to anybody on the call that has burning questions about the Venture Studio or Spring, please drop them into the chat and I will work with the panel on those. In the meantime, I do have some questions. Jimmy, would I be able to ask you to take the slides down? And then hopefully we can have the panel members on the screen. If anybody who isn't in the panel, can I ask you to turn your camera off? Apologies, the webinar functionality wasn't working for us. So just so you don't get pulled into questions. Brilliant, thank you, wonderful. All right, Jimmy, well, thank you for walking us through that. That was really helpful. It's been fabulous coming on the journey with you. So great working with all of you. Eric from Impact X and Sahal from Data Technics, welcome to the panel. So some questions that I've got to kick us off, and then would love to go to the chat function for some more questions. So Eric, I wanted to start with you. You bring a huge amount of experience from your time at Impact X, and you would have seen many great ideas scale and be adopted across a variety of sectors in that role that you play there. So it'd be really great to hear what advice you have to the water sector when it comes to adopting new technologies and innovation.
Thank you, Carly, for having me, and it's good to follow Jimmy, who's joined our team. As you can see, why he's such an asset. And Carly, when I hear that I have a huge amount of experience and expertise, it obviously means I'm old. So thank you for pointing that out, because it's so true. I've been around for many, many different cycles. Could you, so when I think about this question of how do we actually innovate within incumbent organizations, I'm obviously an individual who, if you don't know, I'm a venture capitalist. And as a venture capitalist, I spend my time looking for disruption, looking for ways in which there are traditional or incumbent players and things that have gone well, but things that haven't gone so well, and haven't created sort of the promised land that we hope for. And what are other people thinking about ways to actually make the world more improved in some fashion? And because I'm always focusing on disruption, I sometimes forget that there are organizations that function very, very well. They have been in the business of what they do for, if you're in the water industry, for what? Centuries. It's not just decades, it's centuries, and have been able to, for the UK and other spaces, have been able to sort of serve the water needs over a course of centuries. That's a phenomenal accomplishment. What makes those sort of organizations steadfast and steady and able is also one of the challenges for therefore being able to disrupt. It's the same thing that we see as to why an organization like that was, sort of very big in the entertainment space, Blockbuster. Why did Blockbuster not become Netflix? Since they had access to content, they had a lot of customers, and people were sort of thinking at it from a brand perspective. Why didn't one move to another? And sometimes what we find is that the combination of such a steady state, which is a very comfortable place to be, and the kinds of people who are inside that organization, where we over index in terms of people who are able to maintain the steady state, as opposed to people who are thinking about what the future can be, and who has the power, and who has the voice, and who has the influence. So the thing that I believe has to happen within the water industry is an understanding that future and change might be challenging, but that if indeed we combine some of what is our steadfastness, and therefore we understand exactly how things work, why things break, what doesn't necessarily go well, maybe we talk about something like the newest craze of flushables, which aren't flushable and sort of continue to create blockages. Since we know sort of what happens with blockages, we know what happens when these sorts of things end up in the water system and how hard it is to then sort of cure for them. We know all of those sorts of things. When someone comes with an idea as to what we might do, not about flushables, but about anything, and especially if it's data driven or if it's something which is an innovation economy, coming from the innovation economy, being able to say, how do we then not just say, no, that's not going to work, but how do we interrogate it effectively? And do we actually have ways of doing that? I think if we consider from a industry and incumbent perspective our processes and how we therefore make our processes a bit more inclusive. And so that then goes exactly to what ImpactX believes in, that there are voices that generally are not at the table, and those voices not being at the table have a tendency, therefore, not to then influence what the future might look like, and therefore we are getting sometimes very suboptimal solutions. If indeed we figure out processes, you don't have to change everything, but figure out processes that allow us to imbue some of that other learning into our traditional processes, the things that make us steadfast and steady, and then combine those so that they can get an outsized kind of, at least in our planning and possibly even in our execution. That is when we actually then have not just innovation for innovation's sake, but innovation in an applied fashion, and that applied fashion having disruptive qualities. That's what I would say then, Carly, from all my long years of experience.
Brilliant answer as always, Eric. Thank you. And I think there's something really interesting there about that tension that you're describing, because for the water sector, it has been rightly so very risk averse, because you're dealing with a critical asset and therefore you want perfection. Whereas in innovation, you're looking more for good enough, let's try, let's learn, let's move fast. And there is a tension between those two things, and we need to find a way to operate within those realities. So how I could see you. Sorry, Eric, do you want to?
I just want to say actually one more thing, because I actually do think it's then interesting, because I've worked for a long time I've always worked in if you're trying to think about how do you change brakes for a car, brakes have to work 100% of the time. It is not that they can work 80% of the time, which might be good enough in the innovation economy. So trying to think about those things. And when you mentioned that, I thought about that exactly. This question of, yes, it can't break. It needs to be able to be consistently effective. And how do you combine those things? So bring some other voices to the table. My apologies for interrupting.
No problems. Thanks, Eric. Sahar, so it's fabulous that I'm getting to see you around a bit more on the network and learn more about what you're doing. And so as an innovator in the sector, and as somebody who's graduated the United Utilities Innovation Lab with your company, Datatechnics, what's your advice to new entrants coming into the sector, and how can they successfully mobilize innovation?
Yeah, great question. And thank you, Carly, for inviting me onto the panel to actually speak about this, because it's something that I'm very fortunate to have seen multiple founders in this space apply different methodologies to trying to grow a startup in the UK water scene, or UK water technology scene. And it's very interesting to have that reflection on kind of what works and what doesn't. I think I'm going to make some certain assumptions here that we're sort of gearing this advice towards companies with a certain level of capital starting off, who more or less know their problem statement. They kind of more or less know which part of the water sector, which challenge, as you defined it, Carly, in the sort of earlier stages of your slides, what they want to go at. So I think the very first thing that I would say, the biggest reflection from myself, from the learnings of other companies that have got it right, as we obviously try to do, is KYC, know your customer, right? know who you're selling to, know their nature, know their procurement methodology, because we're not selling to individual consumers behind the smartphone. We're not selling to small businesses. If I'm talking about startup founders who want to be successful in the UK water market, they need to be aware that they're selling to large, complex entities with complex governance structures. And from a procurement perspective, that presents a certain reality to the way that you run your business. And fundamentally, if there are any startup founders here, to give you a really tangible bit of advice, I would say hold a cash reserve that's sufficient for the sales cycle. Know that the sales cycle is slow, and you know, we're not disparaging anybody by saying that, but there's obviously a lot of risk that needs to be mitigated in introducing anything new in the way that you've just described, Carly, right? Like, we have to be sure that what does get implemented, to use Eric's example, we have to make sure that everything kind of works 100%, especially if we're sort of talking about anything that's in contact with a clean water supply. So you need to hold sufficient capital within your organization to allow the water company to de-risk your product or your service such that it can then take that on into BAU. And then I think the other thing that I'd probably say is find your champion, right? Like, find that person that thinks you are literally the best thing since sliced bread. Because if you can find that person, they're your access path, your route through this complex organization, this behemoth, Leviathan, and all these other synonyms of that effect that are just too complex for you to navigate. That's the reality. If you're a small business, like, we're very fortunate to have a wonderful team of 15, and they're all brilliant at what they do. But even if we as an entire business just structured and focused on one water company and said, right, we're going to try and navigate this one entity, we'd still, for what we do anyway, in terms of predictive asset management, we'd still not be able to have all of the conversations that we need to, or we may be able to do it with one water company, but certainly not the whole market. So you have to have people inside the water companies that are bought into what you're doing, who will aid you in managing the internal process. So those are probably the three things. You know, really know your customer, structure your business in a way to that is in line with that customer's procurement methodology, and then, as I say, finally, just really find those people who back you.
Some really good tips in there, Sahel. Thank you. And I just wanted to pick up on that sales cycle point, because I think it's one often gets criticized in the sector for having such a long sales cycle. And, you know, you understand why when you come from out of the sector and you've had other experiences. But there is a reality to this, that things need to be tested over weather cycles as well. And you need to go through seasons to get to that de-risked view of an innovation to be able to implement. So I think there's a balance to take here in terms of how long it takes to sell the solution, but also how long it takes to trial a solution as well. And appreciate all of that is weighted against a startup pace. However, your point around cash reserves is really important, to make sure that you understand the environment that you're working in. But that's not to say that there aren't things that can be accelerated, and that's exactly what we're here to do, to help unblock some of that. To the procurement point, we are actually going to look at procurement at the Northumbrian Innovation Festival. So for anybody who wants to come and help us try and accelerate that from a spring perspective, then the opportunity is there to do that as well.
I would just very quickly just tack on to that, Carly, and say, you know, you're absolutely right. There's, for certain products, there is a seasonality attached to it, and with certain things, you just cannot accelerate the pilot process within one organization. But I think the value of what you just described earlier, the reason that's so important by way of eradicating multiple trials, where you get organizations to buy into the structure, the methodology, the results of a pilot/trial at a given water company, and say, no, we trust that this water network or this laboratory environment is indicative enough that we can adopt it. It doesn't need to be at, you know, as large a scale as the company that did the piloting, but certainly at a larger scale than purely piloting, because otherwise you're in this position whereby you're trying to fit a square peg through a round hole. The most important thing, the most important commodity to a startup is time, undoubtedly, and the thing that large corporates have a lot of. I'm treading on eggshells here, is time, or at least cash reserves. And so you have to be, if large water companies want to procure from small businesses, they do need to be awake and astute to the nature of those companies and how important it is for them to procure quickly.
Yeah, and something else that time is now incredibly important to is the environment as well, and solving the problems that are related to that. So that pressure is there as well. Okay, brilliant. Jimmy, I just had a question for you, just doing a bit of a time check. If we could, we've got 2 more questions from me, and then I'd like to come into the chat. So if we can bear that in mind in terms of length of answers, that would be brilliant. So Jimmy, we've spoken a lot about how the water sector can move into adoption of new innovations and technologies. What is the Venture Studio's role when it actually comes to the adoption point? So you've given us a really good run through of how the selection process and assessment works, but what happens once we get to that up and running and wanting to adopt innovation?
Yeah, and I think the key thing here that we're looking to drive is collaboration. So it's collaboration across all of the parties, the innovators, us, Spring, customers, Microsoft. And we don't see it so much as trying to sell something as in trying to create equal value for all of those mutually invested partners. And I think what we're really looking to do is have those rapid feedback loops so that everybody's kind of gaining from that. So the innovators are able to advance their solutions much quicker, but the thing that they're developing is going to be exactly what the water companies need. And then kind of the last thing I think that the studio itself brings is a mixture of experience and having walked a mile in those shoes already. So between us, we spent a lot of time selling and operating and working into regulated industries and public sector industries with the long sales cycles and the complicated procurement processes and delivery processes. And we understand those, we understand how important it is for each innovator to understand those, and we'll help them through those processes as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jimmy. And I can see a few questions coming in on the chat, so I'll come to those in just a minute. But Eric and other panel members, there's one last question that I wanted to put across, and that's around the diversity aspect of what we're trying to achieve here. So Eric, I'll start with you. You know, a large part of your work is around supporting diverse and underrepresented founders in sectors that traditionally haven't been representative of society. And the water sector is similarly in that position where it wants to support new entrants coming in, and it wants to support more diversity, increasing accessibility to underrepresented founders. So it would be great to just hear a little bit more about how you've tackled that challenge and how the water sector can apply any of those learnings.
So for ImpactX, the challenge is one that was mentioned by Jimmy during his presentation. When you look at the allocation of
Oh, it was going to be such a good answer as well.
Yeah, we've lost him. He's in the deep south in America this morning. So,
you're
back,
Eric.
You're back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So that, there's been so little capital which has flown in. The way that ImpactX always looks at this is we look at, and let me give you the big secret. The big secret in successful investing, it's whether you're a private equity investor and venture capital is a subset of private equity, is that you are looking for places that other people are not looking. Inefficiencies are the place. You don't want to go where everyone else is running. That's sort of, part of the buzz economy. That's part of the hype economy. You want to try and find areas of extreme value where if you're looking at future trends, the possibilities will show you that indeed over time that these will be the places where others will find value. You found it first, they will come to it later, and therefore it will increase the valuation. That's the game, right? So if you're looking and doing what everyone else is doing, you're not going to get results that are very different from everybody else. So looking for places of inefficiency, and that's investing in women and people of color in the UK, Europe, and generally around the world, is a place. It's the same conversation that I had a little bit when I answered the first question, and that was, if you have a certain number of different voices around the table, the likelihood of getting different sorts of answers to traditional problems and disruptive approaches that are successful is increased. And we show that if you look at any McKinsey study, this has been talked about for decades. It's just clear that that's what happened. So the Impact X wants to spend its time making sure that we're doing not just following what is the traditional, but what is going to be the non-traditional. We are disruptors at our very core. What's more disruptive than going where other people are not going? And we then have been able to show in our first fund and now in our second fund that by doing that, you get very high return on your investment in two ways, not only the financial return, but then you also are able to do something else, because women and people of color, if you invest in white men have networks of white men and they invest in other white men, and then they sort of hire other white men. If you just look around at most technology companies and other innovators, you'll see that that's actually the case, because most of us are taking a bit of a shorthand. We use our own networks in which we source everything. In terms of this, when you look at women and people of color, they tend to over-index in terms of hiring women and people of color. So you actually end up with this, what is it called, compounding of impact. So not only are you then investing, but then you are creating sort of more opportunities for other women and people of color so that they create pedigrees and resumes that then are actually able to go out and do other sorts of things, all of which is helpful not only to the investors, the employees, the companies, but then also to the investors. Ultimately, we believe that that's what will be very transformative for the water industry. And this is why we're doing this, because we believe that there has not been enough time spent away from our traditional tables to find solutions to intractable problems. We think by doing this, we're going to find some solutions which are absolutely extraordinary.
Brilliant. Thanks, Eric. Now, there's two questions in the chat that I can give quite quick answers to. Jimmy Sahal, do you want to add anything else to Eric's answer there in terms of the underrepresentation goals that we've got behind this?
I'll add just literally a few sentences, which is more a reflection than anything else. From the very first day of starting Datatechnix and operating it as a British Pakistani, obviously I have tried to induce a level of diversity and inclusion within the organization, because I'm fully well aware of its multifarious benefits. The thing that has particularly upset me is, I've probably reviewed in the course of my time at Datatechnix for probably like 13, 14 roles, upwards of 700 to 800 CVs. And in that time, if I had to guess how many of those were from women, probably less than 3%, 4%, something like that. And that's a real shame, and that, to be honest with you, that's a structural issue that we have within STEM in the UK anyway. So the government has a policy issue that it needs to address there if we want to have greater access, or that we want to see women more in those roles. But that apart, because I don't really want to get roped into that discussion about what the government ought to be doing, just from a Datatechnix perspective, I think it's been a real challenge that I'd love to have more women in our organization, but we just don't get, certainly for the deep tech engineering roles that we've been going out with, AI, electronics engineering, even the civil engineering roles that we've gone out with, we just haven't had the application. So unfortunately, I don't have a resolution for that. So apologies for just adding doom to what is already, difficult and challenging time for everybody. But yeah, that's just a reflection, and I don't know how it gets solved, but it hopefully will do as time goes on.
Yeah, and I have an inkling for a lot of us who are involved in this conversation. This is just the very beginning of us all having this conversation, and there's much more beyond this studio that we'll all do together to help tackle this problem as well. Conscious that we've just hit 1 o'clock, there are two questions I'm going to answer very quickly, and then we can wrap things up. One was around, are the solutions being asked for the Venture Studio prioritised to the Water Innovation Strategy? Absolutely, yes. In the process to getting to the 3 statements that Jimmy shared, we took the priority ambitions from the Water Innovation Strategy, workshopped them with the water companies, and came to those 3 statements. So that is the foundation of where those came from. The other question was just around investment into Spring and the 250k that I mentioned from suppliers. So let me just quickly elaborate on paid for services, which was the term that I used. What we're going to do is start introducing fees for some of the services that we are running, for example, the showcases that we run. So it's not that we're looking for sponsors or big investments into us, so there won't be any bias behind those investments. It will be purely a revenue stream of services that we're delivering for people. So hopefully that's answered some of the questions. I can see a couple of comments have just come in late, so we'll have a look at those afterwards and we'll drop answers to anybody if they require them. So just to say thank you very much, Jimmy, Sahal, Eric, for joining us for this panel session. Really lovely to have you. Thank you for everything you're doing behind the Venture Studio and the brilliant partnership that's involved there, and really looking forward to seeing what comes out the back of it. And thank you to everyone else for attending and listening in today.
Thank you very
Thank
much for your
you.
time.
Thank you all.